Sorry, listeners, you missed all the chat about hurling.
About hurling, yeah. I'm a big hurling guy now that I live out here. What are you gonna do? I don't want to dox myself, but I did enjoy wandering around town when people were all hopped up on hurling goofballs. I thought that was pretty cool. What are you gonna do? People take it seriously, sports. What are you gonna do?
Yeah, you can sympathize with that.
Yeah, so no more hurling talk, unfortunately. I say we just get into it. We're back on our farm bullshit. How about that? Yeah. Pretty good. I don't know. We read something about workers' inquiry in the Jasper Burns book, and now we're like, maybe we should be reading about something that isn't a super niche, like Marxist, like silly debate. Maybe we should be reading about things that matter.
We should. This is very, very populist reading we've done this week.
Yeah, exactly. We're checking in on the farms. We're seeing how they're all doing. It was good. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Let's just get right into it. We read a essay. It was basically like a study that was done in 2018, I think, that we got sent by friend of the show, Will, who wrote the kind of agro-industrial society and its future essay that we read out on the show a long time ago. And this was an essay that he sent over as kind of just like an introduction to agroecology. And what it is it's called an Agroecological Europe in 2050. And the kind of subtitle is Findings from the 10 Years for Agroecology Modeling Exercise. So it was written by a few people. And yeah, it's just basically a modeling exercise for figuring out how Europe and potentially some environments like Europe could create a sustainable agroecological like agriculture, which broadly defined means a bunch of different things. It isn't just kind of what's going on the farm, but I really dug this. It was very refreshing, like I said, to not be talking about like, well, what did Rosa Luxemburg say about this when she was talking with Lenin? What did the Group of International Communists, what did Gilles Dauphine say about this? And it was good. This essay passes the test of communism. You know what I'm saying? Well, maybe it doesn't. Maybe we'll get in towards the end that it doesn't. I liked
it. Yeah, no, I really agree. No, it's nice to dig into something more concrete, a little bit scientific, and as a lay reader, I guess my approach to reading this was to some extent take at face value what they were proposing and absorb the sort of like concrete proposals. Without sort of poring over every table and every reference and every sub-study. In some respects, it's sort of like a meta-analysis of lots of different studies or an attempt to find sort of like comparable data that's quite useful, or to pull data out of certain studies that don't necessarily refer to European agriculture and sort of fit it to that model. But yeah, it's a really fun collection of proposals. I really enjoyed it. It's funny at the end they kind of like end with this acknowledgement that it's somewhat utopian as a proposal, and they're just like, well, yeah, of course that has to be the case, kind of thing. But I enjoyed that aspect of it. I mean, we'll get into some of the critiques of how this meets or how this clashes with a sort of the capitalist realist sort of like a recognition of how this might clash with our Marxist understanding. But there's aspects of this that would be well informed by sort of like Marxist political economy, but also are quite in step with it or in line with it, easily adapted to or complementary of a left-wing analysis of the situation, I suppose.
I definitely got the feeling that they are kind of like co-travelers, the authors of this, because like, yeah, at the end, they basically do just say like, oh, and then there's the political and social element of all of this, which basically means it would be impossible to implement this as a program. And in fact, they also just say like, this is not a program. This is a series of suggestions, while at the same time also being like, if we don't at least radically change the way that we, grow and raise our food along these lines, something like this, we're going to not have the ability to grow food anymore. So also we do need to do it.
Yeah. In some respects, it's really useful to be like, here's the practical proposal. Like, let's put aside some of the like sort of tricky reckoning with political economy, this kind of stuff to the side for a second, and just be like, what do we have to do? Here's the data that presents it as feasible and plausible.
Yeah,
yeah,
it's just
it was
necessary.
refreshing to just step away from that for a minute and be like, oh, okay,
We can just talk.
we can
We're
just do
we're
it.
talking here.
We can just do it. We can just do
Yeah,
it.
exactly. I mean, that's the thing. Like, they're all like, when it comes to ecology and especially like agroecology, you have to, because they're just like, this needs to happen. Otherwise, we won't be able to eat. You know what I mean? So it's like, to a certain extent, when you talk about this stuff, you do have to kind of detach it from like political economy, not political economy, but maybe politics proper, just because like, what they're saying is necessary and capitalism will never be able to do it. So, like, take that as you will.
Yeah.
Give me my grant funding, please.
Yeah.
But
yeah, as a podcast as a podcast that assumes from the offset, an A per hour assumption is that
Yeah.
capitalism won't be able to do it. We're ready to go.
We appreciate it, man.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, maybe like, because it's been so long since we've talked about agriculture and about specifically like agroecology, maybe we could just like give a quick kind of rundown of this stuff. Like, I think most Marxists and like anarchists and everybody like really appreciate that the current ways that capitalism produces food and manages the soil and especially the biodiversity of the planet are like radically not inefficient, but leading to rapidly to a place where it can no longer do what it needs to do, which is namely produce food, whether that's through soil erosion or a million different things, which we'll get into here in a second. But I think that when you try to research this stuff as like a Marxist or whatever, you come across a lot of kind of really unscientific approaches to agriculture. And, you see things like permaculture will be the first thing that you find. I think if you Google like left agriculture, sustainable agriculture, which is a bit of a bummer because, well, there's a lot of really interesting, good stuff in permaculture. There's also the glaring assumptions that we need to do away with what they call monocropping, which is basically like growing one crop over an extended area, which if you were to get rid of that, everybody would just starve because everybody gets most of their calories from cereal crops, grains, rice, things like that. So, you do need an approach to this stuff, which is realistic and which can actually try and understand the problems that we're facing scientifically. And I think that when you read a lot of kind of Marxist approaches to this stuff, it's pretty clear that a lot of authors just Google it and just go, or we need to do stuff like permaculture. And it's just like, okay, well, maybe let's have a bit more of a reasoned approach. And the reason that I think I, and also you, have kind of found what's called agroecology so interesting is because it really does attempt to treat this stuff, at least on terrain that we're very familiar with. It's very reminiscent of systems theory. It takes a very broad, overarching, kind of very scientific view that isn't quite technocratic. Like, it isn't like micromanaging everything, but it is definitely treating agriculture as a system of chemical flows, whether that's biological chemical flows, energy flows, geologic flows, organic and inorganic. And the kind of one of the quick definitions they give of it in this is the idea of agroecology consists of applying the concepts and principles of scientific ecology to the management of agroecosystems, taking account in particular of the biogeochemical flows and the functional interactions between organisms at the level of complex agroecosystems. So this, like, you'll see, listener, the royal listener, here in a moment, like a lot of this stuff does jive with kind of like the systems theory stuff that we've spoken a lot about, like political and economic systems theory. And it's also just so refreshing to see stuff that recognizes that agriculture isn't just growing food on a farm or raising cattle. It's everything that goes into that. It's all of the machinery, it's the energy, it's the labor, and importantly, it's the biodiversity of the entire planet. So the last thing I'll kind of just say of the kind of like broad agroecology stuff is that it's really refreshing to see an approach that treats biodiversity, which is maybe what we would just call in another context variety, right? With its due kind of diligence, and isn't like, isn't just saying bring back, this bird because it's like cool. It's like, well, you need to bring back as much as possible because that's really going to be the only way to encourage enough kind of biological variety to really maintain a viable planet. But also, there's room for like moral stuff, like we like that bird, so bring it back because birds are cool. So this is definitely the approach that at least I've found is like the most scientific and the most good of all of the sustainable agricultural practices.
Yeah, I really appreciate that recap because it's rejigged a lot of things for me. Um, there, what you've just made me realize, to some extent, is there's almost a natural. Obviously, there's a natural um, coherence, I suppose, between the idea of agroecology and, as you say, broader systems theory approaches, or uh, um, just sort of systems theory thinking, I suppose, or like agroecology as a subset of a certain type of systems theory approach. I almost feel like agroecology is almost necessarily like it could be necessarily anti-capitalist, or it contains quite a fundamental critique of capitalism as well. One of the things that I really enjoyed about the beginning parts of this essay, and it kind of reminded me to some extent of some of the things we read in The Dialectical Biologist, um, was how they describe how modern agriculture works. And one of the things that stood out to me, as well as it seemingly chiming quite nicely with a Marxist analysis, but also just a broader anti-capitalist one, is there like um, describing an agricultural process which is heavily industrialized, as you say, like huge amounts of monocropping. So you use the same land to just like make the same crop over and over and over again. The aim, obviously, um, in line with our understanding of um, how capitalism functions, the aim is just like expand outputs, grow, sell more, export, and then also it's just got this kind of like totally, I guess, coming back to like a systems theory approach, it's got a very like it's not a closed system understanding of the environment. It's very like brute force almost. It's like just pump the ground full of um, artificial fertilizers, spray, cover the crops in um, pesticides, like all the consequences of that be damned, all of the knock-on effects for all of the human life, but it's also like any other producer, any other element of the supply chain, any other part of the broader system that this environment is part of. And so, yeah, it felt like a nice description of modern agriculture, modern capitalist agriculture, and also like a very pointed critique, but also a pointed critique that synthesizes well with what we might want to introduce as a kind of like uh, socialist systems theory critique of capitalism more broadly, which is to say, well, we need to sort of like, well, we need to plan basically, but we need to like plan our approach to organizing all of these systems in a way which is like um, sustainable, positive, takes important inputs from like the human beings involved, and just all of these things are completely ignored by capitalist agriculture. But like so many potentials for reorganizing agriculture are opened up by this type of analysis, I suppose.
Yeah, just reorganizing life too in a
Yeah,
radically
yeah. I
just
mean,
like
yeah. It
better
has a knock-on
way.
effect. It has a knock-on effect. Where like we can
Mm,
think about all social systems as being ecological ones in some respects. I think, like, well, I mean, like, Murray
absolutely.
Bookchin,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Hey, maybe that's what we do next week.
yeah.
I think you're really right to mention the point about this kind of approach to agriculture as being kind of almost inherently anti-capitalist. And it wasn't actually something I thought about, but like you can't. It just got me thinking. Like you can't really sell agroecology to somebody. You know what I mean? Like you can definitely sell permaculture to somebody because, like, if you look up permaculture, you're going to find a million like buy my 5-week course where I tell you to do this and do that, and it's
you just
$550 or
you
some
just need
shit.
to import this exotic
Yeah,
Asian
exactly.
tree into your
Just
like.
grow. Listen, you can forage Japanese knotweed. Just plant it all over your garden. But like agroecology, on the other hand, right, is such a broad, totalizing, like structural change to everything that it's like you cannot really like. If you're spouting agroecology, it's probably because you believe in it and you think that it's going to work or it needs to work. And I think when you take that kind of approach, you really do necessarily see like, oh, I kind of have to be a bit of a socialist if I want to make this stuff work because capitalism isn't going to do it. And I think that kind of gets us to one of the most important points maybe we could to kind of start getting a bit specific about this stuff. The kind of general approach, maybe I'll just say quickly, is that they're really encouraging biodiversity in all aspects of life. And that, like, so part of this project is creating what they call landscape infrastructure, which is like off farm or maybe like farm adjacent things where you're encouraging wildlife. And that depends on where you are, what that's going to be. They talk about, hedgerows instead of fences, obviously. They talk about creating just like stony brooks and, river spaces for different animals, and, specific types of trees, depending on where you live, to encourage more birds, blah, 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 blah. They talk about phasing out, as you say, like pesticides, and they say at the beginning phasing out synthetic fertilizers, and then they kind of like that back a little bit towards the end. But and then also like a massive change in diets, and we'll get into all of this stuff. But I think it's probably worth just saying that this approach that we're talking about is really geared specific. It's a model that was built, and it's a model that was built for Europe. And Europe, around where they're talking about, it is quite varied. You think about like Norway versus like southern Italy or something like that. But generally, it's a pretty temperate climate. And what works here would probably work in a large part of the United States. But when you start talking about tropical systems, when you start talking about, Central, South America, different places like that, you can still have an agroecological approach. You would need to, but it would be radically different to kind of what we're going to be talking about here. So I think maybe we just say, like, up front, this is for Europe. This model was specifically built for Europe. And while some of the ideas can be applied, like those general things, a change in diets, infrastructure, like landscape infrastructure, all those things, biodiversity, the specifics that we talk about are going to be pretty radically different no matter where you are.
Yeah. I mean, maybe worth emphasizing also, not to disagree with that at all, because this is a very Euro-centric aspect of the whole equation, but there is also quite considerable analysis of how European agriculture intersects with agriculture and other systems of growing in other parts of the world, or like there's the consideration of European exports and what they export and how, and what things are imported from different parts of the world. I mean, specifically, their heavy focus is on the import of like feed for animal stock in Europe, right? Like, which is leading to like monocropping of like soybeans or whatever in the Amazon, and also massive environmental destruction there, sort of cutting down the Amazon to grow export crops for cattle feed for Europe. So there's sort of intersection with the rest of the world system, I suppose. But yeah, totally agree.
Yeah,
It's
definitely.
sort of like European specific approach.
Yeah, I mean,
quite deliberately, intentionally. And but there are some interesting tidbits where they just sort of like sprinkle in like what this would mean for different parts of the world.
Yeah. Every now and then, whenever they'd casually drop a sentence or two about the Mediterranean region, it was very grim because it would be like, and the rest of Europe would need to subsidize the food in the Mediterranean region because there were going to be massive droughts and heat waves, and the ability to grow food will be curtailed massively. It's just like, oh my God. Yeah. Okay. So another kind of like the thing that makes this so, I think, innately anti-capitalist is that in this model, in this approach, they necessarily just come out and say production is going to drop, and it's not going to drop by a small amount. Efficiency is going to drop by like around 35% total output. And they kind of just say, if you want to produce sustainably and you want to be able to continue to produce food in a way that isn't going to wreck the ecosystem and erode all of the soil, you need to accept that we're going to be producing 35% more food broadly. And we'll get into kind of what type of food they're talking about. But the way that they make this work is they basically say people's diets have to drastically change. And they say that that's a good thing, right? Like, this is the main part of their approach, is it's not just a modeling exercise for agriculture, it's a modeling exercise for changing people's diets to be much more healthy, because they just basically say people right now, their diets are way too heavy on calories, way too heavy on protein, specifically protein that comes from animals, whether that's dairy or meat. Whereas they say there's not nearly enough fiber and there's not nearly enough vegetables and fruits in people's diet. Also way too much sugar. And, they run through all of the things that we know this causes, cardiovascular disease, obesity, diabetes, things like this. And this is kind of how they're able to get around the fact that this model requires us to produce less. And the reason I say why that's so innately socialist is because it's like, oh, so this will never be adopted in capitalism, because you can't really just ask capitalism to be less efficient. And they admit as much right at the end, right? Where they're just like, yeah, this would up production costs pretty massively. And it would also like mean we're producing less, which means that businesses obviously would never do this. And like the amount of subsidizing that would need to happen on top of what we already subsidize farms for, right? It's
And
like,
food would probably cost a lot more for the consumer as well.
exactly. Yeah. At least at the beginning,
Yeah.
definitely. And so it's just like, yeah, this drop in efficiency was pretty stunning, because like, I feel like when we've read about this stuff before, they've kind of been able to get around it and be like, no, we'd be able to be as efficient. You would just not in terms of labor. Like we'd be able to have the same output, but everybody would need to work a lot harder. Here, they're kind of saying people would need to work a lot harder, and you would also get less food, which is so funny because I was just trying to imagine selling this at like a commie meeting and be like, there goes the communist who just wants us to have less calories.
Yeah, if you're like a ultra productivist, like communism will be even more productive than capitalism.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, the obvious environmental limitations aside, like obviously, as you say, this. I mean, it's like I was really taken aback by it as well. Actually, that very forward and deliberate admitting that, like, yeah, this is just what's going to happen. We're just going to produce less food, and it's a good thing. And I've still not quite worked out how I feel about that per se. Like, obviously, they believe they've got data to say that, like. I mean, I suppose it's anecdotally true. The population of Europe is like consuming too many calories potentially, but more interesting, I suppose, is the shift in where those calories are going to come from. And I suppose a knock-on effect of that, from what you were saying, also is like an effort to grow more regionally specific crops for consumption in that area, grow more seasonally. Largely just to limit the impact that it is had by either trying to import these things from further afield, but also just like they want to do away with the massive monocropping that's happening in the Mediterranean region, and grow like summer fruits for Northern Europe during the winter, this kind of thing. So yeah, there's also that kind of like effort to at least make people eat more seasonally. This isn't. I don't believe this is a kind of like a total condemnation of food imports and a total commitment to the necessity for it to be in totally local. It's not a localist approach. It's a and we'll get onto some more of reasons why this is the case when we talk about things like nitrogen flows and that kind of thing. But broadly speaking, I feel like this is very much we need to bring this down to the lowest possible sort of like rung of the systemic ladder, I suppose. Not necessarily the lowest, but the one where the system can be maintained, the loops can be closed, I suppose.
Close the loops. They're all about closing loops. Yeah. There are a lot of loops that need to be closed. It's also worth saying, I suppose, too, that number, the 35% drop in efficiency, also includes the fact that currently animals that we raise consume between 58, the number is, and 67% of all cereal and oil seed crops, respectively. So not between, respectively, which is a pretty staggering number, right? So they're basically saying like whole countries and whole parts of America are just given over to growing soybeans or different forms of protein for animals, which are exactly for that. They're just for cows so that people can... Dude, people eat so much meat. It's so crazy how much meat people eat. It's like, it's unbelievable that people eat meat every day, let alone red meat every day. It's just like, my God, like maybe somebody does need to come in and be like, this is not what you should be eating. It was pretty funny though, on one of the things, on one of the graphs or tables or whatever, they were like, here's like, the nutritional information for what the average adult eats today. Here's why it's bad. Here's what people should be eating. And here's how agroecology can kind of accommodate that. The protein intake was limited at 50 grams a day. And I was like, no gains for the communists. I see. You will need to receive special allowance for extra protein powder if you're living in that society. That was very funny. But yeah, so like, all of this, it's very difficult to talk about one thing, obviously, because this is a systemic approach, but all of this is really tied together because the approach that they take to actually, raising livestock is one which champions biodiversity, and it also cuts down on the amount of kind of like, cereal crops that need to be raised in this kind of monoculture way, which we'll get into through this kind of grassland approach. And if you do that, then that means that people can eat less meat. And they also talk about, it's like people aren't eating more meat than ever now, really suddenly and really abruptly. Like this happened within a generation just because they decided to eat more meat. Like we briefly touched on this when we read the Social Contagion book about COVID, but it's like people are eating more meat because it's pushed upon them. And it's a really interesting way of thinking about people's diets, right? It's like, it's very Marxisty because it's really a production-centered approach to understanding why people eat the way that they do. It's because at a certain point, it was just way cheaper. Like it was almost like an origin of capitalism thing. It made a lot more sense for farmers to raise cattle than it did to raise lentils and soybeans and chickpeas and shit like that, right? So it's like people's diets have kind of been pushed on them. So they're like, actually, if we just, this is going to sound like a truism, but it's like if we just produce less soybeans for cattle and we raise less cattle, people will just eat more plant protein. It's like, wow, there you go.
I guess it's interesting. We were saying that like I found their approach to the raising of animals for food really interesting. This is not like the vegan like proposal, that's not what we're saying. There was
that's what we're saying.
Yeah. Well, yeah, they do hint at some interesting possibilities, I suppose. But broadly speaking, they sort of like separate the raising of animals for meat into two categories. And surprisingly, actually, like they're quite favourable to the raising of cattle under certain circumstances. And they are very much opposed to the raising of pigs and chickens, which have become a massive part of Western diets, primarily because pigs and chickens are the ones that by necessity have to be fed on crops that are raised specifically for the raising of livestock, whereas sheep, goats, cows do eat foodstuffs that are not edible to human beings, so they can eat grass. And so in this model, they actually fit into, they fill an interesting niche in the broader agroecological system that they're proposing.
A necessary.
They're quite, yeah, exactly. Very much so in the sense that like they seem to think that when it comes to supplying sufficient nitrogen for the growth of food, in a sustainable way without the problems that we have at the moment, like massive runoffs and blooms in rivers and that kind of thing. Cattle fulfill a very important part of that. They're sort of advocates for another way in which it sort of flies in the face of capitalist agriculture, right? Like capitalist agriculture is very minded toward, let's find the cattle that will grow the fastest, grow the biggest, can be slaughtered the soonest, can be brought to market as quickly as possible to sort of realise the capital return. Whereas in this proposal, they're very much advocating for, no, let's find the cattle that will eat the stuff the most difficult for human beings to digest, that will be able to subsist on what's available in the grasslands, in the pastures, in the fields for the broadest portion of the year, with the necessity for the least amount of external inputs to their diets, kind of thing. So, but yeah, so for the gym bros that are getting a bit worried that they can't have the quantity of chicken breast they're used to, there'll be plenty of milk to go around. You can have your 6 gallons of milk a day if you want.
Just drink 6 gallons of milk a day. It's fine. Dude, whenever you see like shit on social media of gym pros just having like shredded, unsalted, unmarinated chicken. It's just like, my God, the hubris of these people. I think you raise a really good point. I think about, they talk about ruminants versus monogastric animals. So monogastric animals are animals like us, basically, where we have one digestive system and we rely on, I guess, like bacteria and enzymes to digest our food and to, give us the nutrients from that food. Ruminants are animals, like you say, like cattle and sheep, who eat grass and who are big mammals. And so you go, well, you see them eating all day, but you kind of go, how is there enough nutrition in there? How are they able to just digest grass? And it's because they rely on fermentation in a series of, cows have, I think, like 4 different stomachs. The grass ferments, they regurgitate it, they chew it again as cud, then they swallow it. It's a very long process, but exactly like what you're saying, like, again, part of this, and this is kind of what I meant by it's hard to talk about one thing at a time, where they start talking about grasslands, they don't get too much into this, but you can imagine a ley system where you're doing field rotations, where the kind of manure from the cattle helps put nitrogen back into the ground. It helps, add a layer of manure and compost or whatever. But also you can imagine growing at that time soybean crops or just bean crops, legumes in that same field to then put nitrogen back into it as well. And then once you grow that, then cows come in and they eat all that shit that most other animals wouldn't eat. But what you're saying kind of, it reminded me of, again, in Social Contagion, where they were talking about the reason that capitalism pushes chickens so much is because those types of animals, specifically chickens, are really able to be farmed in a real kind of like Taylorist factory capitalist's favorite kind of, thing, where like scientific management. And this is very grim, but for like the life cycle of those animals, where cows, it's just kind of like you raise a cow, it's going to take as long as it takes, and then you kill it and you get what you get. Chickens, you're able to just like bioengineer the shit out of and stuff them in, millions to one like barn, make it so that their lives are incredibly short, they grow incredibly quickly, they get incredibly fat and plump, and then you kill them and that's it. And it's kind of a constant process of squeezing a type of like surplus, not surplus value, obviously, but like you're able to, the turnaround on the life cycle of a chicken is very quick. So that's why capitalism once again, couldn't really make this shift to focusing really on ruminant animals because, it can't just solely do that, because it's more attractive for a lot of farmers to, be the foster chicken people versus the heavily subsidized, virgin cattle farmer, I suppose. But to put it in a way the Zoomers will understand. But, all of that stuff, I don't know. It's interesting. Like, it was a little bit surprising to me because, like, as I was saying, like, it is necessary in this agroecological system to have animals like cattle, not just because they're a source of protein, but also because they're really vital for maybe the next thing we can talk about, which is like closing the nitrogen cycle and encouraging biodiversity on farms. And it was kind of cool because, like, maybe you can get into that here in a sec, but like we've spoken about on the show before, where it's like, I don't know, I'm a vegetarian and you've been a vegan forever. Like, I think I at least am very tempted to just be like, communism, no meat. We love the animals. The animals will be our friends in communism. But, it's a good point where it's like people eat so much fucking meat now. It's unsustainable. It's incredibly unhealthy. But you should have a little bit of meat, maybe on your Sunday dinner if you must. And, the way in which there's kind of like, I hesitate to call it a fully symbiotic relationship, because at the end of the day, you are still slaughtering and consuming that animal for your own gym gains. But, like, it is slightly symbiotic to a certain extent that the animal's life cycle is, and like lifestyle, if that's a good way to put it, is kind of adapted in a necessary, sustainable way to maintain the biodiversity of a farm. And without them, it would be pretty impossible, I think, to really produce cereals, grains, anything like that, like sustainably.
Yeah, I mean, speaking purely from like an ethical standpoint, I've definitely like softened in my acceptance of uh, the necessity of these things, just because they fulfill a place in people's diets, and like it would be wildly utopian to say that this has to stop straight away. Like, um, who knows what's going to happen in the fullness of time? Who knows what the sort of like abiding, evident ethics of socialism or communism might be? Um, as a sort of process of transition, which this essay definitely sort of fits into that category. Um, you know, I've come to terms with it, I suppose.
We'll allow it.
And I mean, this is like very much this essay is very much predicated on the available data, extrapolating from the information that they have. Like they propose like this whole process of like closing the nitrogen, what did you say, cycle gap kind of thing,
Loop.
like loop, is almost the part of this essay that is most I suppose open to interpretation still. Like the margins are quite small. The different proposals go to different lengths to fulfill it, kind of thing. Like there is a certain amount of um, hedging when it comes to unknown consequences, what future technologies might be, like how these things will unfold over time. Um, this is not the definitive like the future can't possibly be vegan or vegetarian or whatever, versus it has to be, you have to eat this amount of meat to be a good socialist. You have to drink some French, you have to have some French cheese, and you have to drink loads of milk. Like
Eat your daily allotment of eggs.
yes, no eggs. You're not allowed.
Yeah, no eggs. No, yeah, that's right. Well, yeah, no chicken. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, maybe we just talk a little bit about the nitrogen cycle stuff. Mm-hmm. Basically, the way things work now is there are a series of different chemicals that are required by plants to grow. Nitrogen is one of the most important. And basically, the way that the majority of nitrogen is put into the soil now is artificially. There's a whole process that we've spoken about before whereby this happens naturally, where the kind of like thriving microbial life of a healthy bed of soil will take the nitrogen that's in the air that plants can't digest on their own or consume on their own. They'll consume it, they'll excrete it in a form that plants can consume. And there's a bit of a symbiotic relationship there between the microbes, specifically bacteria, and the plants where they're able to grow. Certain plants, like the reason we keep talking about legumes, have evolved so that they actually have little nodules on their roots where they give little huts for these bacteria to live in. And that's how they fix nitrogen into the soil for other plants to come along. And it's why when you grow broad beans, which you should be doing every year, which we haven't bought up broad beans in a while, so here you go, broad bean heads. That's why usually you leave the roots in the ground. And because if you take the roots out, it's actually really interesting. You can see the little nodules, the little huts for the bacteria to live. It's very, very cool. But anyway, so right now capitalism does not have healthy variety of microbial life in its soils because that isn't a really efficient thing to try and do. So the majority of the nitrogen comes directly from chemicals, and the process to produce these chemicals, artificial fertilizers, is like hugely energy intensive and wasteful. I saw one statistic somewhere where it's like it amounts for like 1% to 2% of all energy usage, which seems crazy. And I would like to do a fact check on that, but it's entirely possible. It's fucking crazy. And the way that this approach, this agroecological approach, suggests closing this loop is by, I guess, first of all, just maintaining healthy soil. And the way you do this is through permanent beds, no-till systems, which we've spoken about at length before, but also organic fertilizers like manure, which is another reason why you kind of need to have livestock in and around farms. You need to, and kind of like, bring them, decouple, as they would say in this essay, decouple kind of, crop production from livestock production, compost from various off-farm, green facilities, growing a lot more legumes. And then finally, the one was also synthetic nitrogen, which I thought was funny because like at the beginning of this essay, they were like, and we will completely do away with all pesticides and all synthetic fertilizers. And at the end, they're like, we will probably still need some synthetic fertilizers. And it's like, okay, yeah, well, what are you going to do? I think they're kind of very good to just be like, they walk a fine line because they, on one hand, they kind of go, we don't have all of the answers now because it's only through like practicing agroecology that you're going to know how to do all of these things properly in your given environment, because it's such a like, there's so much information coming at you. But then also it's like, yeah, but we actually don't know how much synthetic nitrogen we'll need. And it's like, well, hopefully not much, like hopefully none actually, but what are you going to do?
But it's like I think there are a few reasons. They decide early on that they're going to base their modeling on the idea that we're going to use none. And I think one of the reasons is just that the data that they have accessible to them is most useful when framed in that with that predicate in mind, I suppose. But also, it is quite a sensible approach to take, which is like artificial fertilizers are an additive that you use to fulfill a shortfall. They're not. They shouldn't. What we need to get beyond is using them in the brute force way as the natural default. And the best way to get out of that mindset is to imagine not using them at all. And then, if we need to add them in to fulfill a gap, sure, yeah, fair enough. I mean, they're not like, I like what they say, what they reiterate multiple times in this is like, just because that is the case, that there may be a shortfall, you might need to use artificial fertilizers. That doesn't invalidate the argumentation that goes on in the whole rest of this essay around what we really need to be focusing on is how do we do all the things you talked about, right? How do we build up the soil ecology so that it can continue to maintain substantial enough, productive enough harvests to feed the European population of 2050. And I think the reason why they say that potential shortfall doesn't invalidate the argument they're making is purely for that reason. That like, I mean, like, just because you might have to have this as an additive, you just need to stop using it as your first port of call, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. Once we get the Murray Bookchin, no import, commune, isolationism, then we'll be fine. Until we get to that point, though, you still will need nitrogen. And it's interesting, though, because they are able to come out.
Once we're recycling all of our own waste back into.
Yeah, exactly. That was actually pretty funny in the bit in Capital where Marx is like, and why are we taking everyone's shit from the cities and pumping it into the ocean? They basically mentioned that briefly, like urban waste, and they're like, it's negligible. So Marx proven wrong once again. Boom, gotcha. But yeah, to kind of go back to the artificial fertilizer stuff, like it is interesting how they're able to unequivocally though come out and be like, but we will completely stop using pesticides day one. Mm-hmm. Like I thought that was very, very cool. They didn't really get into this too much because they didn't really talk about herbicides at all, I think. But when we've spoken about stopping using herbicides and pesticides and things like that, it's like entirely possible. You absolutely can do it, but it's just going to require a lot more work. And this is kind of one of the things we always come back to when we're, confronted with a like version of fully automated luxury. Nobody has to work communism, where it's like, that's not like, it's not really ever been the point. You know what I mean? Like it's about making these things like, more efficient. Yeah, sure. But also like more enjoyable to do and feel like you're being directly social or whatever. But it's just something to keep in mind. It's like efficiency dropping, labor efficiency dropping, more people are just gonna have to work, because it's like, not only is capitalism fighting a losing battle with producing all of the herbicides that it does, where weeds are just getting smarter, much like, antibiotics, that kind of like whole kerfluffle. It's like weeds are just able to now we have super weeds where they're just able to kind of resist being sprayed. And obviously capitalism isn't built for having people go through and just weed every bed, which is, probably going to have to be something we do, and keep an eye out for pests and different things like that. That wasn't really mentioned in here because it's not really the point, but it's something to keep in mind.
Yeah. And capitalism obviously killing all of the pollinators as well, which is
yep.
Yeah, not the best.
Man, I since I moved out here, I don't have my allotment, and I don't have a garden anymore because I have an apartment with a little balcony, and I've been growing a bunch of different things, one of which is pumpkins, and I've been like, why are my pumpkins not why are they not getting pollinated? What's going on? And I just remembered it's because like I'm up a few floors and bees aren't coming up here, and also there are no bees, so I've been out there manically trying to like manually pollinate all of my pumpkins, and it's been driving me nuts because I keep forgetting.
Like rubbing the pumpkin flowers together.
Literally, yeah. And it's like I'm in a bit of a fishbowl as people. It's like first thing I do in the morning. People are like, "What the fuck is that guy doing over there? What are you gonna do?" Yeah, what else can we talk about? I think maybe something that you keep touching on, which is like the import angle of all of this. Do we want to talk about that a little bit? Where there's an undertone of all of this where it's like European self sufficiency, which is a bit. Whenever I read it, I was like, where's this coming from? Maybe they're just trying to appeal to people, but also the undercurrent of that is it's just like it's much more ecologically valid to not have to get all of your meat from 3 different countries, and so yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean the real uh, systemic approach to take to this would be to like uh, recognize Europe as a particularly geographically bound area, but to recognize that on the periphery, there like some areas are going to fall into other ecological systems, and I'm sure there'll be other trading relationships, and I'm sure we're still going to, I hope we're still going to get coffee beans from somewhere,
Nope.
please. And there is part of what's built into their model is a presumption of a similar amount of agricultural export, or a desire to fulfill at least to continue some amount of agricultural exports. I think they talk about uh, cheese, I think, quite a lot, and other products like that, partly because they're such a fondness for
Yeah.
bovine friends. Uh, yeah, I don't know. I don't know whether the intention is to. Well, in my favourable reading of this, going beyond perhaps what the authors are intending to say, like I would just say that what this represents is the idea of coming back, breaking a system down to its smallest components, and trying to operate at that level first before um, sort of like incorporating a higher level of recursion, I suppose.
And just greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like there are significant knock-on benefits, right? And I think one of the things that they say is, by virtue of the fact that we will stop buying all of these animal feeds that are grown in South America, it opens the way to for other parts of the world to develop more agroecological ways of sort of fulfilling their own agricultural needs. They also say that although I believe, maybe you can fact check me on this or not, but I seem to remember one of the things that they say is, although Europe's in a position whereby a switch to agroecological production might result in a decline in overall productivity of like calorific content of all of the food produced, like that doesn't necessarily mean that the knock-on effect of other parts of the world developing similar systems is actually not going to have the opposite effect of like because they're just developing in a different way, or developing from a less fully capitalized production model, or just an overall less developed sort of agricultural system. I think their intention is that there might be positive. This is not a like pulling up the drawbridge like Fortress Europe kind of situation.
That would be the most like late capitalism way for us to get something like agroecology. It's just like a Trump figure in Europe is like, we don't want any more imports from America, so we're going to do agroecology. It's like, oh, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also just like I think one of the main points is too is a lot of the stuff that's imported is just really just for animals. You know what I mean? Like it's generally for like livestock. And so if you cut down on livestock, you just wouldn't really need as much imports. And then that would also open the door, hopefully, when you have the kind of like global worldwide instantaneous revolution, for those places to also kind of re-center kind of like quote unquote local. And when I say local, I don't mean like even regional. I do just mean like possibly even like continent wide, like they're talking about with Europe, like much more kind of efficient, by which I mean less transport, ways of growing food, because you're not just being used as a like agri world to only have soybeans. You know what I mean? Like to make another reference.
Yeah. I appreciate
Yeah.
very much.
To put it in terms you understand, Dan.
Yeah.
Um, I
Yes. Where are my hive cities? That's what
yeah, they're coming. They're
yeah.
coming. I did really appreciate too in this how they were just openly like, we are not technologically determinist here, and like, because we can't really afford to be. They do mention a number of times like, one could imagine this shortfall or that shortfall as being kind of like, made up for by advances in agroecological research, because right now it's not a whole lot of people are really, getting funding to do this, let alone practice it, because to practice it, you need to do it on a very large scale. So presumably there would be ways that people would figure out, especially if like this was a classless society and people were able to kind of like take production into their own hands and figure out different ways to do things efficiently. Um, but they're really like, another one of the benefits, I suppose, of what I'm trying to say to an agroecological approach is that they're not falling back on a like Deus ex machina where, they're waiting for carbon sequestration to be invented, you know what I mean? Or they're waiting for like the ultra plow to be invented or the ultra cow. Like, they're basically just saying, here's what we can do with the given level of technology now. And in fact, it's actually like borderline, not regressive in a bad sense, but much less technology is actually used in this process than is used in agriculture now. And agriculture, again, broadly defined, is not just what's happening on the farm, but everything that goes in it and into it, into that process and everything that comes out of it. Like, yeah, it would be specifically like with transportation, specifically with like, the production of inorganic fertilizers, pesticides, things like that. And also just like if you want to weed something, you kind of just probably got to get in there with like, some hand tools, which kind of sucks, but that's really the only way to do it. It was really good because again, when you kind of read some of this stuff, like we keep joking about, bringing up Bookchin or whatever, but like Bookchin is kind of like a little bit maybe on the end of like, and then everything will be completely self-sufficient and it'll all be fine. And it's like, he's Mr. Anti-technological determinist number one, but also that kind of smacks of that sometimes. So it was good to read an approach that's just like, this is eminently doable with what we have now, and you would actually want to do it with less than what we have now. It's like, that vibes with my version of communism. Like,
Yeah.
eminently doable.
Yeah. And I think my broad, like, the sort of broad understanding that I'm coming to is that like the opposite of like globalized capitalist economy is not small scale like retreat to the communes, sort of like you know bordering on primitivist anarchism. Like, what I've learned from my understanding of Marx and Marxism is that like the global connectedness of the sort of like production system that's been brought about by capitalism is an important advance, and use it in if we combine it with like a more like systems theory approaches that we've been talking about in this episode. We can, but plus combined with a kind of like maximalist democratic system of managing the economy, we can create a system which is both global to the extent that it needs to be and allows for systems like global system-wide planning and organization if necessary, but allows for also a similar level of organization and planning at sort of all levels of recursion in that system, where and when they're sort of optimally necessary. Yeah. Anyway, that's my communism.
Yeah, hey, there you go. And it's really interesting because it's just like, this is just another example of kind of capitalism has developed our productive capacities up to a certain point, and it certainly did develop them. But this is just another example of the social relations of capitalism are now once again just holding back the productive capacity of humanity and of our broader society. And it's interesting. Like, this kind of stuff, I think, meshes with a lot of ideas like when we were talking about the Volvo plants, where it's like they tried to do something that was more efficient, but it became clear that capitalist society, even though that's its whole MO, couldn't allow it to do those things because it was too, upskilling, too democratic. It didn't fit with like union structures, different things like that. So it had to kind of shoot itself in the foot. Volvo, I mean, like, this is just another example of that, and it's really, really interesting. It's like, if Marx was right, that is when revolutions happen, when there's this tension. Well, we have quite a bit of tension now.
It's
If
tense.
that means
I'm tense.
things are tense, I'm definitely tense. If that tension building up more means no longer able to produce food, it's like, well, hopefully, before that point, things figure themselves out. But like, whenever I think about that stuff, I'm always really interested because I go back and forth on this question a lot about whether or not that situations like these are like grounds for organizing in any kind of way. And they wouldn't be particularly like traditional ways of organizing, I don't think, but it's just interesting. It's like in industries where they're no longer efficient as they could be because of capitalist social relations, in places, I suppose, and this is probably like a few decades down the line, where, food is getting harder to come by. It's like, maybe it is just like organizing systems like this to the extent that you can, because these are such big systems. Like, maybe that's a method of organizing. I don't know. I mean, it runs dangerously close to kind of, I think, maybe like a localized attitude of organizing, but I don't know. I'm just kind of spitballing because it's like when you see these tensions, my first thought is always to go to like, how could this be used to kind of further a kind of revolutionary attitude? But I hope they can be, because if they aren't, that's pretty grim. It's like if workerism was the only way to do it, we might be fucked.
I mean, I've definitely I've definitely overlooked the subject of the agent of the farmer when it comes to
Yeah. Those incredibly progressive people out here.
Well,
yeah, sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's very easy to overlook them, kind of thing. And I suppose in some ways, obviously, like agricultural workers split down the line in exactly the same way that like people do in other industries, right? Like there's still the same class divisions in agriculture as there are in any other industrial or like non-industrial workplace, I suppose. But just in terms of like the idea of how would you get buy-in from people who are already involved in this kind of production, who is it that you're trying to target? Like, what kind of system? Like, are we talking about like collectivizing the farm, or are we talking about breaking up the large farms into smaller units, or are we talking about appealing to the romantic sentiments of like farmers that already exist that perhaps aren't like as bought into like this industrial way of operating as we might imagine they are? Like, I don't know, in terms of organizing that, like or attempting to organize in that population.
Tricky.
Big
I mean, I guess
open questions. Big open questions.
Yeah, and I guess
something,
that's a kind of similar thing. That would be a similar thing to being like, let's go to the factories and appeal to the war managers.
Yes. Yes, we just need to be Narodniks, Jack, and go to the peasants.
Yeah, yeah, that's what we
teach them about agroecology.
Yeah, when you said collectivize the farms, I was like, maybe we try and take a different tact this time.
Yes, yeah.
There's part of me that just really wants commune building to be a thing, and I suppose that's.
You mean you mean like the quote unquote hippie commune?
Not like a hippie commune. I mean, more so in the sense of the like ultra left kind of like.
Oh, okay.
You just build it. You know what I mean? Yeah. You just build it. I mean, they would be like, you build it because you have to.
It's the Joshua Clover commune.
Yeah, the one that's much more likely to happen.
The commune. Yeah. The commune.
Yeah. But I mean, I don't know. That stuff is just so like, that would be cool. That would be cool.
Yeah.
But if you try to do it like, that's such a collapse-based way of viewing revolution that it's like if you were to try to do it now.
Not based, like the kids say.
Yeah, it's not based. Collapse based, comma based. Like if you were to try to do that now, it would just be exactly like what you say, hippies. You know what I mean? And that, yeah, not going to get into that, but I don't know. I just want to grow food, man. That's all I want. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say. I just want to grow food.
I mean, maybe there's a movement to revivify, I suppose.
Well, we'll see.
I mean, it was interesting. It's interesting. Like they were. One of the maybe something to say in the sort of defense of this essay. Not that we're attacking it in any way, but like. Obviously, they say that at the end they have this recognition. This is quite utopian. but one of the things they like to emphasize is like really all they're doing is trying to reverse the shift that's only happened in a shift that happened in about a 30-year period between 1950 and 1990, say. Is that 50 years? No, that's 40 years. Anyway,
I forget what you said.
The 50 and 80. Let's say 50 and 80 because those are the dates that they use, I think. So this is not so like unthinkable a thing to do, and also like again, this like they do make. I mean, what appeals the kind of appeal you might make if you were a social democrat that sort of likes to harken back to like the building of the NHS in Britain or something like. But like they do offer some sort of concrete defense of the possibility of affecting this kind of transformation. I don't know. Really, when you were talking then about growing things, and I was trying to imagine what a movement for like sort of encouraging, demanding the space for growing things.
Here we go.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you know,
it was the levelers.
Yes. Oh no.
It always comes back to the levelers.
Yeah. Yes. Just need to occupy some commons.
Yeah.
Or not commons. I don't know.
Yeah. Occupy the commons. Yeah. The capitalist state gives us commons, and then we, the communists, go and take it over. That's not for the general public.
It's in the name.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is I think with any kind of organizing like that, that's based around these things, unfortunately, if you take kind of like a Marxist approach to it, it's like you're either going to try and do it now, and it's going to come across as weird and reactionary, and you're not going to attract the people who, you know, you're likely to get, or that you would want to get, who are like actual like workers who would want to build a better world. But like, or when you are able to attract those people, it's, you know, things are so bad that the only reason they're coming to you is because they have to, you know what I mean? So it's like, if you want to make a place to grow food, it's like, well, I don't know.
It's the classic bind, you know, we to do agroecology, we have to have socialism, but to have socialism, we have to already do agroecology.
There you go. That's it. What are you going to do? We'll get there. We'll get there one day, I reckon. That what you did say, that's I think maybe a good point to end on, is that they were like, this seems like a radical change, but if you look at the radical changes specifically in the like decade after World War II that took place, it's like that's unimaginable, the changes to agriculture and the social, not just the ecological element of, you know, on-farm and off-farm practices, like the social element of all of that, like, was just crazy how much it changed very quickly. So, you know, it's eminently doable to do this, given communist social relations taking place in the continent all at once. So, you know, cool, man. Yeah, great. Cool. Okay, I recommend everybody read this, just like, even if you aren't a like farming person, just because, you know, it's good stuff to know about if you're a commie or an anarchist or whatever, about how it can actually be done. So
and to some extent we've presented this as being very prescriptive, but theirs is like they're drawing on a lot of different information, and so like we've glossed over a lot of stuff which is like more substantiated in the essay itself. But also I think they're like, this is they're opening the space for an ongoing conversation, reanalysis of the data. I think I don't quite understand the 10 years, 50 years, the 10 years versus 2050 kind of thing. But like, my understanding is they're taking data from the past 10 years, trying to work out what are possible routes that could be taken that get us to a positive point in 2050, are quite open in their acknowledgement of the sort of like the gaps, the unknowns. And there are some positive aspects of that, you know, it's like, here's things we've not even tried yet. Like, what is it that will happen if we, you know, can substantially revivify the soil ecology? Like, it's a space it's a form of research, a space of research that's like not even fully understood yet, but it presents very positive possible alternative routes to agriculture, but then have considerable knock-on benefits to like human health and like tackling climate change and stuff like that. So we may have made them sound very I feel like I may have made them sound very prescriptive, but actually it's quite like an open contribution to an ongoing discussion. So it's definitely like reading oneself to get that aspect of what's being presented, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure we'll be back next time with something that's very prescriptive. This is the only way to do revolution.
Yes.
Yeah, get us back in our
next
comfort
week,
zone.
Amadeo Bordinger.
Yeah, we keep talking about doing that.
No.
I don't know. Not promising.
No, it's the new state and revolution, you know.
Yeah, exactly. For some reason, my brain was like, "There's a new state and revolution."
We've been podcasting for too long.
Yeah, part 2. All right. Yes. Well, this was very fun, Dan. Thank you very much, and look forward to doing it again soon.
Yeah. Really enjoyed this. Thanks everyone for listening. Bye-bye.
See you. Hey everybody, Jack here. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. The song that you heard on this episode is Music to Kill Bad People To by King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. You can go ahead and check this song out much more on their Bandcamp at kinggizzard.bandcamp.com. If you want to go ahead and get in touch with us, chat shit, tell us that we're wrong, whatever you want to do, you can go ahead and do that at auxiliarystatements@gmail.com. You can just send us a message there, or you can get in touch with us on Twitter, on Discord, on Instagram. You're a smart person. You can find these places. We got a YouTube. We post stuff there as well. Sometimes we stream. Thank you so much for listening. Till next time.